You know how most prices end in a 99, like 99p magically sounds less than £1, even though it's basically the same amount of money? Well, I reckon someone at Yamaha must be supremely confident that their bikes offer good value for money, because instead of taking a quid off, they've been adding 2 on. Take the MT-07 for example, that I featured on the channel recently at £6,902. The R1, £17,402. The Tenere 700, it's £9,502. Basically their entire lineup ends in a 2, including this, the MT-09. But when you start to look into it and look at the specs, it really is exceptional value for money. So much so that I reckon it might be the ultimate in terms of road performance versus cost. So in this video, we're going to go through the specs, I'll tell you what's new for 2021, and I'll round off by comparing it to its key competitors, the Street Triple and the KTM 890 Duke. Essentially, if you've got 9 or 10 grand, which naked bike should you buy? But before we get started, as always, a massive thanks to Fowlers in Bristol for lending me their demo bike. If you're at all interested in this bike, then don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to oblige. I'll put a link in the description to the Yamaha demo booking form. It's also worth a quick mention that Speedo Angels, who are one of my channel sponsors, have just released a whole bunch of new products for 2021 year model bikes. The protective films only cost about a tenner, and Speedo Angels have been kind enough to give me a 20% discount code, which I've put in the description below, along with the links to the MT-09 product page. That said, they make them for a huge range of bikes, so do check out their website, whatever you ride. So it's been a pretty full-on redesign for 2021, and I'll start with the engine, which has gone up in capacity from 847cc to 889. That means this inline triple is producing an extra 4 horsepower, so you now get 118 at 10,000 RPM, but you also get more torque. It's gone up from 87.5 Newton meters to 93, and not only that, it's now produced at 7,000 RPM as opposed to 8,500. Now, don't get me wrong, some extra peak power is always going to be welcome, but for me, it's that extra torque that's produced substantially lower in the rev range that's going to make this engine feel really usable for real-world riding. As with all new bikes, it's now Euro 5 emissions regulations compliant, and they also say that they've got 9% more fuel efficiency out of it. It looks like a big tank, but it's 14 litres, which is pretty much par for the course for this type of bike, and at the official fuel consumption figures, you should get about 170 miles out of it, which is decent enough. Most riders will probably be wanting a break before they need to fuel up. With this redesign, they also took the chance to shed a bit of weight, so 1.7 kilograms in total off the engine and exhaust. I think it's 1.4 off the exhaust system, 300 grams off the rest of the engine. Speaking of the exhaust, you've now got an exit underneath there on each side, so it gives you a stereo soundtrack, they say, which improves the sound, and I've got to say, it is a cracking sounding bike for a stock exhaust. Now, we'll have a good listen to it when I've been through the specs, but my expectations were quite low for this bike. I rode the MT-07 the other day and it was just so muffled, I assume by Euro 5 noise regulations. Yamaha have done some magic on the MT-09 though, because it sounds way more lively and it sounds brilliant when you're on the gas, especially banging through the quick shifter. That up and down quick shifter is now standard for 2021, which, you know, that's a nice feature for a £9,000 bike. And there are plenty of other little tweaks to the internals. So you've got new ratios for the first and second gears, you've got a ride-by-wire throttle, you've got new materials in the slip assist clutch and a new cam shape to give a lighter feel at the lever. So as you can see, you know, they've been pretty thorough with this update. And that thoroughness extends to the chassis as well. Now you've got a new frame design, which they say gives 50% more rigidity. Some changes to the geometry as well for better front end grip. The swing arm pivots have been moved from outside the frame to the inside, again giving more rigidity but also less unsprung weight for a better response on the rear suspension. And there are more weight savings here too, so the total wet weight is down by 4 kilograms to 189. Some of that's down to thinner walls on the frame. They've switched the subframe from steel to aluminium, and the new swing arm is lighter. And then there's these new spin forged wheels, so they're spun, heated up, rollers are then applied, and they get it down to 2 mil of thickness despite having the same strength as the previous generation's wheels. That change alone accounts for 700 grams of the weight saving, and given that it's unsprung rotating mass, that's going to have a significant effect on the way the bike handles. As for the suspension, it's largely the same, so a KYB fully adjustable fork and shock, but they have changed the settings to account for the new lower weight. And while you still get 4-part radially mounted own brand brake calipers at the front on two 98mm discs, you now get a radial master cylinder, which is going to give you more feel and power. And another significant enhancement for this year is the tech. So you now get a 6-axis IMU, so you get all the lean sensitive rider aids like traction control, wheelie control, slide control, lean sensitive ABS. And it really is up there with much more expensive bikes when you look at the features that you get in terms of rider aids. That's all administered through a new 3-inch TFT dash, and you've got various settings for, I think there's 4 riding modes, and it's 1, 2, 3 and 4, where 1 has the least intervention, and as you max it up to 4, I think you get reduced power output from the engine as well. Same for stuff like the traction control, so mode 1 is the least intervention, mode 2 more intervention, and there's a manual mode as well. And of course you've got new switchgear for controlling all this stuff, along with new LED lighting. And that brings me on nicely to the styling and this front end, and I'd love to know what you think of it now down in the comments below, given that we've had a couple of months to get used to it. When it was first announced, I did say in my video that I thought that people would probably get used to it. It's such a big, bold leap forward. It's a very, very modern design, and I'm wondering whether anyone who didn't like it at first has changed their mind. I said this the other day with the MT-07, which has also had, you know, a really radical modern update, that it does look much, much better in the flesh. Thankfully, this also gets the Storm Fluo paint job option, so the fluorescent orange wheels, grey on the tank, and those little colourful stripes as well. For me, it's a great looking paint job. It's modern and it looks kind of stealthy, but then the punchy wheels just really give it that pop it needs for a bike like this that has plenty of attitude. The other thing is they've gone for this coverless design, so most of the bodywork is gone. You've got the headlight shroud, you've got the tank, but otherwise there's not really any plastics or bodywork to speak of. Even here, the rec reg, you know, it's on display and it looks really functional. I quite like it. It really makes the back end look svelte and thin, and that means it looks relatively bulky towards the front and gives it that aggressive hunched over look. Personally, I think it's the right amount of like wacky and modern and pushing the boundaries that suits this category of bike. And even though the pricing is really aggressive, I think it looks quite premium. There's nice finishing on it. It's a big tick for me. Now, in terms of the ergonomics, it's an 825mm seat height, so pretty standard for this type of naked, sporty bike. There is no low seat option though, so with the MT-07, you've got the option of a 14mm lower seat. The Street Triple, for example, that comes in a really low version, but if you can't get on with this 825mm seat height, as far as I'm aware, there's no way to lower it, so certainly something to consider if you're thinking of buying one and you're a bit short in the leg. I'm 175cm or 5'9", totally fine for me, but I don't mind slightly taller bikes. Some people really like to be able to flat foot at either side. The other thing that struck me as soon as I got on this bike was just how high the handlebars are. I mean, look at the length of the risers on it. It feels different to the Street Triple, for example, which I think has a more sporty feel to it. You're pitched up slightly over the bars. This bike feels like it's been designed to be more of an all-rounder for commuting, possibly a bit of touring. It's just got a really lively nature underneath it all as well. For me, it just feels like a nice, versatile riding position. The only thing I think I'd mention as a negative is that the amount of lock on the steering isn't huge. Probably won't bother you while you're on the move, but if you're in heavy traffic and having to make some tight turns between cars, then it might become a limiting factor. I certainly noticed it when I pulled up on this car park. I wanted to reposition the bike for the video, and I just found I had to go back and forth a little bit more often than I might do with other bikes. Anyway, I think it's about time we had a listen to it. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. I think it's a great sounding bike, especially considering all the restrictions we have at the moment. Triples just sound beautiful anyway, but this, especially when you get on the gas, it's just got a lovely bark to it, and I love that sound when you're going up through the gears on the quick shifter. So look, in terms of what this bike is actually like to ride, the engine is the centerpiece. It's just so lively, exciting and fun. There's plenty enough power there for the road, and there's plenty of torque in the mid-range, and the new ride-by-wire throttle delivers it in like a really engaging way without being snatchy on and off the throttle. Given that it's pretty lightweight as well, it just feels super quick, and for road riding, for me, that's all you'll ever need. Combined with that soundtrack, and I'd say the brakes are pretty damn good as well. Loads of feel and progression, they don't need to be any higher spec than this. And it just makes for so much fun, especially when you consider that price point. The suspension feels completely adequate as well, but you could always pay an extra 1,200 quid for the SP version. That gets you an upgraded version of the KYB forks with like a diamond-like coating, I think, on the stanchions, but also an Olin shock. You get cruise control as well, and a paint job and a comfy seat. That is definitely something to consider if you think you might want a bit more out of the suspension, but for most just messing around on the road, I found the handling to be totally fine. I'd also say the electronics on a dry summer's day like this on decent road surfaces, the best thing you can say about them is that you don't really notice them. I've been riding it all day with everything in the sportier settings, and that's when you don't want it to start intervening. There's absolutely no need for it in these conditions, but it is nice to know that you've got the option should you want to really start pushing the limits or riding it through winter and stuff like that. As for how it stacks up to the competition, I mean, the engine is pretty unbeatable. I love a triple, and this is just such a great example of it. That extra capacity means that it doesn't need revving as hard as the street triples, so in terms of like real world fun, I think this bike has it. The parallel twin in the 890 Duke, I mean, I loved that engine. It'll definitely give you plenty of thrills on the road, but just riding this today, it really is the standout feature of the MT-09. I think where the other two might have the edge is in the handling and riding position. This bike feels pretty tall at the front, and I know they've made tweaks for this year, but it just doesn't feel quite as precise as a street triple. If you want something that feels more sporty, then those other bikes might be the better option, but this, as I say, has that versatility. It feels more sat up to me. But I do think the looks are going to be divisive on this bike. Personally, I quite like them. Like I say, I like how they're pushing motorcycle design forward into a more modern place, but for some people they're going to be too much. And I suppose, you know, you do have the XSR 900 that's the retro take on this platform, but it didn't get the same performance updates for this year, and it doesn't offer quite as good value for money. The street triple is a bit more smooth and flowing. The KTM is like orange. Perhaps some people will find something they like visually more in those other two bikes, but if you do get on with the looks of the bike, the price makes it pretty unbeatable. I was thinking earlier about my Triumph Trident. That's £7,195 in the plain paint jobs, 100 quid more for the other two paint jobs. If you fitted the quick shifter as well, which isn't standard on that bike, that's another couple of hundred quid. The price starts creeping up towards the MT-09. If you're on a strict budget and you're looking around that £7 mark, I'd still recommend the Trident. I rode the MT-07 the other day and I thought it was great, but not quite as refined in the handling as the Trident, not quite as much tech. I still think it's a brilliant choice, but if you think you're going to use the extra performance, you're a slightly more experienced rider, but you've got that extra couple of grand, this has to be on your list of bikes to demo. You know what, it's got me thinking, having ridden the 1290 Super Duke car recently and the Speed Triple 1200 RS, those bikes up at like 15 grand. They have so much more power, but honestly, there's very few places that you can use it in the UK on the road. If you're doing track days and stuff and you're super capable, sure, they're probably a better choice, but if you're just riding on the road, you can save yourself 6 grand and get pretty much as much fun out of this bike.